Amar Rabbi Yochanan. And Rabbi Yochanan said, Ovid kechavim she'oisik b'Torah. A guy who's oisik b'Torah, we already learned that a guy who not trying to keep Shabbos, a guy who spends a full 24 hours resting is chayiv misa. Now we're talking about an ovid kechavim she'oisik b'Torah. A guy that learns Torah chayiv misa. Shenemar Torah tziva lanu Moshe meirasha. Lanu meirasha v'loy lahem. It's not for them. And Rashi says, what would be the violation? Under what statute are we going to get the guy for learning Torah? The Iko Mishum Gezel. It's Gezel, because the Torah was given to us, not to the guy. Thank you. Back to more of a Lechsheve, Gabe Sheva Mitzvos. So if a guy gets killed for learning Torah, so why wasn't it listed as one of the Sheva Mitzvos? But they know that they're not allowed to learn Torah. Zokt Gemara, it wasn't necessary because it was already included in previous prohibitions. Either Manda Amar Mayrasha, it's in Migdal Kol Gazala, as we said a moment ago, it's considered Gzela, and that's one of the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach. Manda Mayrasha, so Torah Steve Lord Moshe Mayrasha Kilas Yaakov. We're like married to the Torah. The Torah is like we're a Kala. Dinai Kenair Hamarasa the Biskila. We also know that a guy who's Baal Nair Marasa. We learn from Ish that he's Chayiv Skila Kedina Yisrael. Meisei Freik Gemara. You're telling me a guy's not allowed to learn? Listen to what Reb Meir used to say. How do you know even a guy who learns Torah? He's like a Kohen Gadol. He's Adrab, he's Kadosh, he's holy. It says Ha'adam. It says Allah Adam, meaning even a guy. And for the Gemara, Hasam b'Sheva mitzvahs too. If they learn about what their responsibilities are, then they're benched. But to learn what our responsibilities are, that's Mayrasha Kilas Yaakov, that they're not allowed to do. Now we know that there's a famous line. It came out with a Mendel Bayless trial, and that is Adam Kiyamas Boyel, Atem Kriyim Adam, but Goyim are not Kriyim Adam, right? He's Kari Adam. So if that's the case, what was Reb Meir's bringing a raya from? It says Asher Yasa Oisa HaAdam V'Chabem. Adam means a Jew. So how could Reb Meir use HaAdam to tell me that it means a guy? So Rashi and Tosfos both comment on this in different ways. Rashi says HaAdam Reb Meir Leslei Atem Kriyim Adam V'Lo Oivdei Kechavim Kriyim Adam. Reb Meir doesn't hold to that. Reb Shimon he did Darish Tov Masechah Shevamish. You know who made that drush of Atem Kriyim Adam? It was Reb Shimon. Reb Meir disagrees with it. That is the approach of Rashi. But Tosfos says, and I'm looking at the second skinny line in Tosfos, Rabbeinu Tam Afarish yesh chiluk bein Adam leHa'Adam. Adam is only referring to a Yid. Ha'Adam could even be referring to a guy, and then he brings another pshat from Harav Meshulam, Davka Gaba per Aniyos, Kaira Isam Adam. When you're talking about something bad, that's when you could call a guy with the name Adam. Because the reason why it used the word Adam and not Yisrael is because when we're talking about Piraniyos, we don't want to apply it to Klal Yisrael. So we use the general term Adam, there it could mean a guy. There, because this is not a case of Piraniyos. So it should have said v'chaybam in reference to Kahanim Levim Yisrael. Why did it use a term that's generic? So because of that, we say it means goyim as well. Okay, zok to Gemara weiter. Rab Chanina ben Gamliel Omer af hadam min achai. Dam min achai is also one of the Zayin mitzvahs b'nei Noach. Tanu Rabbanim. It says in the pasuk, ach basar b'navshoy damoy loisechem. This is the makar to Ze Ever Menachai. This is the makar to the issue of Ever Menachai, even to a Ben Noach. Rab Chanina ben Gamliel Omer af hadam min achai. Not only is Ever Menachai prohibited, but Dam Menachai is also prohibited. My time with Rab Chanina ben Gamliel, Kari Bey, Basar benavshoy loy soichel, and Damoy benavshoy loy soichel. So let's look at the actual pasuk, and let's see how it's being read. So the Torah is over here. It says, place over here, Ach Basar benavshoy Damoy loy soichel. So we learned that there's two things happening. It's Ach Basar benavshoy loy soichel, and Damoy benavshoy loy soichel. That's how Reb Chanina ben Gamliel reads it. Rabbanon, who says that there is no Isser of Dam in Achai, Rabbanon, Hahula Mishri Shrotzim Hudasa. The reason why the Torah speaks out, B'damai loy soichel, it's to tell you that Shrotzim, there is no Isser Ever min Achai. Let's have a look at how that works. We learned it before a couple of days ago, but here Rashi elaborates on it. For Rabbanon, Hahuda Samach Dam, Lasaris Ever min Achai. You know why it sticks in Dam in the pasuk of Ever min Achai, even though it's not answering Dam min Achai? Loyla Misri, Mishum Chiyos Samchinon. It's not to tell us that Dam min Achai is Aser, like we just saw from Rabbi Chanina ben Gamliel. Ela Lameser Dam Hakaza Shanefesh Yoitzaboy Mishum Dam Hu Desamchi. There's different types of dam hakaza. Dam hakaza is regular blood that they let out, but then if they let out too much blood, and now the person's going to die because it's letting out the final required minimum required dam, that would be considered aser. The loitema asaris dam gabe v'zavachta mi bekarchu mitzayncha ksiv dam shchitahu to have a dam aval dam hakaza lo have a dam. There, but a general prohibition of eating dam. Don't say it just means dam shchita. Rather, it means any type of dam we're not allowed to eat. That's why when we talk about dam min achai, we're comparing it to ever min achai, even though it's not telling you the isser of dam min achai. But the reason why dam is there by the sugya of ever min achai, by the pasuk of ever min achai, is to tell us ma ever min achai aser machmas isurai. Just like Ever min Achai is also because of its Isser of Ever min Achai, Af Dam min Achai Muzar Allah Mishum Dam. The Isser of Dam min Achai isn't also because of Dam min Achai, because it's min Achai. Any Dam is also, but it's a special type of Dam, Ulavachi Dam Hanefesh. Only Dam Hanefesh, which means is the blood that leaves a person when they're dying, or as they're dying, that's the type of Dam that the Torah is defining is aser. Correct. Just like Ever min Achai is Ever min Achai, so too Dam is Dam. So it's not saying that Dam min Achai has to be like Ever min Achai. It's just like Ever min Achai is aser because of the main reason that prohibits it, because it's Chai. So too Dam is aser only if it's what the main Isser is, which is Sheyeh Dam HaNefesh. Avo Dam HaKaza She'ena Nefesh Yoitzaboy Einoi Kari Dam, that wouldn't be called Dam. Avo Isser Chiyus Lo Nishkaboy. Never does it mention any Isser of Dam and Achai. So therefore we say that Dam, it's only its base Isser, which is Dam Shenefesh Yoitzaboy, is what the Isser is. V'loi b'shum Dam, but not any other Dam. Uvekrisus mafarish, ezeu dam hakaza, shanefesh yoitzaboy. How do you know when the dam is flowing that now it's the dam that's the nefesh yoitzaboy? How could you tell? So to Gemara, we know mitipa hamishacheres ve'elach. I guess the blood starts taking on a black tone rather than a red tone. Mishumas chalotze shacher, when it starts to come out black, at that point there'll be an iser dam, but not a regular dam that's flowing. Okay, Zok to Gemara weiter. Rabbanan ahula dam hakaza. Oh, you know something? I was jumping ahead of myself. I apologize. I was jumping ahead of myself completely. Oy vey. Oy vey. So let me go back and explain the first Rabbanan. Rabbanan ahula mishri shrotzim huda also. It's only to be matir shrotzim. And this refers back to a Rashi we had a couple of days ago. Rashi does not repeat it over here. And that is only the type of dam when is there an isser of dam and achai, or even of aver min achai, is only if it's an animal, it's a creature that the dam is distinct from the basar. By a sheretz, the dam is not distinct from the basar, because by a sheretz you could eat the dam, and therefore there is no isser of aver min achai, to a goy at least, b'shrotzim. And that's Rashi doesn't elaborate here. Rashi elaborates a couple of days ago. I'm sorry.
When is Abraham also?
Only if it's basar and dam is separate. But on the sheretz, I'm sorry. Yeah, it does. Let's go back. Let's go back. Let's go back to the Rashi, and we'll actually see it inside. It is, I think it was 2 blot ago, where Rashi learned that. Let's have a look. Was it Amud Aleph? Yes, over here. Lemisha Shratcha Mudasa Amadaf Nun Zayin Amud Aleph Rashi. Let's see how you know from that pasuk that mentions dam in the pasuk of Avraham Nachai. How does you see from there that shrotzim are mutter? Mishum shehuzaru be'Avraham Nachai me'achal toichel. We already have an iser of Avraham Nachai to benoich from achal toichel from the pasuk when Hashem was being mitzav adam. Yet we still have a second pasuk of we have the second pasuk of ach basar ben nafshay damay loy soichel. What's that telling us? Also, haikra lemishra ever min achai b'shrotzim. To say that you're allowed to eat ever min achai by shrotzim, a guy could eat a live creepy crawly. So this is where I pointed out that you see that our Gemara is very woke, because nowadays it's a big thing in the woke governments for people to eat insects. So here it says a guy is allowed to eat insects, even when they're alive. Oisai basar shekaru damai benefesh. Basar karu basar. Only in animals where the dam is distinct from the basar, where the dam is dam and the basar is basar. The hainu damai chaluk mi besarai. The dam is separate from the meat of the creature, like a regular behema. There asar nelechu be'ever min achai. But v'loy b'shrotzim. The halacha of Ever min achai is not a prohibition related to shrotzim. Why? Shein damoi karu nefesh ala harehu kibisarei. A sheretz does not have the special distinction of dam is called nefesh. There's no special status or prohibition on the dam of a sheretz. Dulu b'Yisrael lo mechayve lakaris. Even a Yisrael who eats the dam of a sheretz, it's not mutter, but there's no chi of karis like there is for the dam of a behema. The less bay el alav. There's only a lav for the dam of a sheretz, the dam the shrotzim kabasar. We consider the dam of the sheretz like basar. So what we learn from this pasuk of achbasar b'damshay damay loy seichelu is, you know what type of iser Ever min achai is? Only basar b'nafshay and damay loy seichelu. If the iser of the basar is different from the iser of the dam, meaning there's an iser to eat its dam. But a creature where there's no chiyuv, if one eats their dam, I can't use the word isser because we said it's a lav. But if there's a creature where there is no chiyuv kares to eat its dam, there also is no halacha of Ever min achai for that creature, meaning shrotzim. So that's what our Rabbanon means now over here on Daf Nun Tes. So Zok to Gemara, Rabbanon ahula mishri shrotzim huda also. Kayoytze b'davar ataymer. It says rak chazak levilti achoil hadam. You know that idam ki adam hu nefesh. Right, so that's a different pasuk. Let's see the pasuk inside. Rak chazak levilti achoil hadam ki adam hu nefesh v'lo yisoichal nefesh im abasar. That is the prohibition of eating dam. V'Rabbanon hahu ledam akazosh sheneshama yoytze by hudasa. The Rabbanon holds that that's only referring to dam, that dam akaza, that the nefesh is yoytzeba. That's what we're learning from there. That if we already know that you're not allowed to eat dam from rock, we already know that dam is osir from the pasuk of the Bnei Noach. This is to tell you a new halacha in the Hilchos Isur Dam is that if it's dam akaza, it's only dam shanashama yoytzeba. Okay, gewaltig. Zog to Gemara weiter. Lama li lemichtav levnei Noach, v'lama li lemishni b'Sinai. Why was it necessary to tell us the Isra of Avram and Achai by Ben Noach, and then by Har Sinai, again, the Torah gave a special tzivui to the Eden only of Avram and Achai. Zok Rashi, which specific psukim are we referring to? Lama lila mitzvah Avram and Achai b'Sinai ubevnei Noach. Otu Yisrael mishum the kiblu Torah yatsu mechal mitzvahs harishonos. The Torah is an add-on. In addition to the 7 mitzvahs b'nei Noach, now you have these additional mitzvahs for a total of 613. We understand why the Torah repeated the Isra of Avodas Kechavim and the Isra of Gilui Arayos b'Sinai. Limilsayu nishnis, to teach us specific halachas about them. And we're going to see in just a moment what those specific halachas are. By B'nai Noach, the Isra, we just know that it's also to do these averis, but it doesn't give us detail. So therefore, exactly what is the Maisa? What is the deed that you must do to be over Avodah Zarah? By Arais, it says that it's also, but it doesn't say what the chiyuv is, how you get punished. What special limud is the Torah teaching us in the fact that it's repeating the halacha of Avram and Achai, even though we already know it from the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach? Zok the Gemara, the answer is Kid Rabbi Yosy bar Chanina. Damar Rabbi Yosy bar Chanina, Kol mitzvah shenemar levnei Noach. Any mitzvah that was already told to the B'nai Noach, the nishnish b'Sinai, and then it was repeated by Sinai. Only shatzah mitzvah do we say lozeh v'lozeh nemar. But what if it was said to the B'nai Noach, v'lo nishnish b'Sinai liYisrael, and it wasn't repeated specifically to the Yidden on Har Sinai? Then we'll say liYisrael nemra v'lo levnei Noach. Then we'll say it was only said for a Yid, not for a Goy, which is counterintuitive. You should say if it wasn't repeated by Sinai, maybe we should learn that it only is also for a Goy and not for a Yid, right? Why do we say that suddenly now the Isser gets taken off the Goy and automatically goes to the Yid because there is no repeat of the mitzvah? I'm sorry? So the Gemara is going to go through it. Va'anu ein lanu ela giranasha. Where is there an Isser that was said to the Yid, said to the Ben Noach, and was not repeated by Sinai? The Isra of giranasha. So you asked the question in exactly the right place, right where the Gemara wanted to ask it. Giranasha. That's right. Because of what we said. That Vibalt, it wasn't repeated by Sinai. The Isra goes off the Ben Noach, and it only transfers to the Yid. Are there things that are also for a Goy and not also to us? No, because we know the Gemara says there's no such thing. Now there's things that there could be a chomer by a Goy over a Yid, but nothing that is completely mutter for a Goy and completely also for a Yid. Tosfos is going to talk about that soon. Zokt Gemara v'alibud Rabbi Yehuda. Now Gid Nasha is really not quite what I said it was, because what I said about Gid Nasha is since it was expressed to the B'nai Noach, was not repeated by Sinai, therefore it's an avera that will only apply to a Yid, not to a Goy. They were repeated. Right, and that's why it applies to a Yid and a Goy. Was not repeated, so therefore it only applies to a Yid and not a Goy. But Zot Rashi, Tzalib Rabbi Yehuda, it's not because of this svara. So Duvi asked, "Is there any? You have any example?" So I said, "Sure, you have Gid Nasha, but Gid Nasha is not a good example because there's a special reason why Gid Nasha only applies to Yid, not to Goy." And Rashi says because there's actually a shaila. When did the Torah give us the tzivui of Gid Nasha? Did the Torah give it to us by Sinai? So how come it's written by the story of Yaakov? Because once Moshe wrote the Torah, the Kodesh Baruch Hu wanted the Torah to put the Isser back where it became relevant, where Yaakov fought with the Malach. But Lamaisa, the tzivui only came by Har Sinai. So that's a whole different reason. There's also a different reason. That is, it was only Alkein Layochel B'nei Yisrael is Gid Nasha. Even at the time where Kodesh Baruch Hu gave them the Isser of Gid Nasha, Hashem said beferish, this is only for the B'nei Yisrael. It doesn't apply to everybody. So Kodesh Baruch Hu specified it. So let's have a look. I'll leave it to Rabbi Yehuda, a very interesting Rashi. The Amar prepare Gid Anosha, Mibnei Yaakov Neser Gid Anosha. Only Bnei Yaakov. Shahayu Bnei Noach, they were Bnei Noach, Koida Matan Torah. So forget. Rabbi Yehuda says that the mitzvah of Gid Anosha was given to Bnei Noach, and Vibalta wasn't repeated by Sinai. Therefore, Vibalta wasn't repeated by Sinai. Therefore, it only applies to Yidden and not to Goyim. For Abban Pligi, they hold it's not true. The Amar b'Sinai Nemar. The Isra of Gid Anosha was first introduced to Klal Yisrael by Sinai. V'loy lahem, and not, it wasn't introduced to the Bnei Yaakov. Ella, shenichtav imkoim. Once the Torah was written, the Torah places the lav of Gid Anosha where Yaakov got into a fight with the Malach. But the tzivui really only came by Matan Torah. The Achar Matan Torah, Kosvei Moisha, b'Makay Mamaisa, al ha'osid, Leda me'ezeh tam neser lehem. Why did Moshe Rabbeinu place Moshe is al pi Torah, al pi Nevuah? Why was the Isur placed there, even though it only came by Matan Torah? It's to reveal to us the reason for the Isur. Rabbi Yehuda Gufei liYisrael namar v'loy l'shar b'nei Noach. And even according to Rabbi Yehuda, that the Isur was given at the time, it became also right away, but it still was only given to the Bnei Yisrael and not to the Bnei Noach. The Bnei Yisrael ksiv. It says it right there in the pasuk. Al kein lo yochlu Bnei Yisrael eskir anash. V'ha the Gamar Hacha. The Oisei no Oimdos b'Yisuran livnei Noach la'olam hutrach l'shnoisan b'Sinai. Our Gemara says the only type of Yisurim that remain for a Ben Noach are only those that were repeated in Sinai to Yisrael. Lav mishum de ilu loy hadrinu havamida nigmar migid anosha. Don't say that the reasoning for that is because I would learn it from Gid Anosha, since it wasn't repeated, just like Gid Anosha wasn't repeated, and it only applies to Bnei Yisrael, so to all Yisurim that aren't repeated by Sinai are only for Bnei Yisrael. You don't say that. The loy nishnis ul Yisrael number of loy noach. You don't say that. You know why? Because you cannot learn from Gid Anosha. Gid Anosha is a unique situation. The mehal lekal lemigmar charei loy nesra ela Yisrael. Because the original Isser, even when it was the time of the Bnei Noach, the original Isser was only ever given to the Bnei Yisrael. Even during the period of Bnei Noach before Matan Torah, it still was an Isser only applying to the Bnei Yisrael. We learn it from the fact that the Torah repeated the Isser of Avodah Zarah and didn't repeat others. That's where we see the distinction that these Averos that were not repeated, like Avodah Zarah was repeated and Arise was repeated, they don't apply to Goyim. That's not mistaber. Adarabba. Midanishnis besinai. That would tell us that Yisrael Nemer v'loy livnei Noach. If anything, the fact that the Torah repeated by Sinai tells us that now we're upgrading. It only applies to it, not to a guy. So we see that the Torah did repeat the Isser of Avodah Zarah by Sinai, even though that Isser had already existed since Adam Arisha's time. And and we see that after Matan Torah, the Goyim were punished for Avodah Zarah. They were thrown out of Eretz Yisrael, as a matter of fact, because they deemed Avodah Zarah. You see clearly from the Isra of Avodah Zarah that was repeated to Bnei Yisrael that it still applies to the Goy. So you see from here that if it was repeated, it applies to Tzad the Goy, Tzad the Yid. But if it wasn't repeated, then it would only apply to a Yid. Livnei Noach, v'loy lishnes, b'Sinai, l'Yisrael, nemra, v'loy livnei Noach. So if it was originally told to Bnei Noach, and it was not repeated by Har Sinai, then we say this Isser no longer applies to a Goy, it only applies to a Yid. Again, the Gemara asked the Kasha. It's not mistaber. Adarabba. Midaloy nishnis b'Sinai, since the Torah didn't repeat it in Sinai, wouldn't that be an indication that Livnei Noach nemra v'loy Yisrael? That would be the svara, not punkt verkehrt. Zok Gemara, duvi svara. Leka midam the Yisrael shari u'la'oivdik kechavim aser. There cannot be a thing that would be prohibited for a Goy, but that would be mutter for a Yid. So now Tosfos comments on that. Leka midam the Yisrael shari. B'davar shehu mitzvah liyisrael lo yamrinin hachi. You don't say that this applies to a dvar mitzvah. The oivet kechavim sheshavas is chayiv. A guy who keeps Shabbos is chayiv. A yid to keep Shabbos is not chayiv. So you see, there are certain things that are usher for a guy and not for a yid. Zoktosh it doesn't apply to a dvar mitzvah. Well, Yisrael mitzvah. So since it's a dvar mitzvah, it's not shver that if a guy does it, he's chayiv, and if a yid does it, he's not chayiv. Avol gav de b'sheni b'Shabbos ein mitzvah Yisrael. Even though we're saying the prohibition for a guy not to do work is even on a Monday or a Tuesday, and there's no mitzvah for a yid to be shovis on Monday and Tuesday. Mikomokem yeshel of mitzvah shvisa Shabbos. A yid has that concept, that mitzvah. Therefore, we can answer shvisa to a goy at any time. V'yala ubrim. What about ubrim? We said that a goy is not allowed to do abortion, but a yid's not chayiv. The oivet kechavim chayiv Yisrael potter. Avagav the potter mikol makim lo yishari. Ein echanami a yid's potter if he does an abortion, but it's not mutter. So that's not either violating this rule. Okay. So Tosfos has another kasha from another place. It says Yotzer Roisha ein noigim boy. The ein doichen nefesh mepli nefesh. Aval koidem sheyetze Roisha hachai peshet es yoda v'chatchatze leivarim umaytzia kedei lahatzal asimai. What if the mother is in danger of dying during childbirth? The halacha is that you can cut it up. You can cut it up out sheyetze Roisha, but once it's Yotzer Roisha, you're not allowed to cut it up. By a guy, it would be osur, even if the baby didn't stick his head out. So you see, it's mutter for a yid to do this and not a guy. Forget, there it's a mitzvah for a yid to destroy the baby if the baby is going to kill the mother. Okay, and then it says, if it's a matter of saving the mother, maybe even a guy is allowed to do an abortion. So these are big shilas, because in the case where it's a life and death decision, you kill the ubor so the mother shouldn't die. Is that allowed if the patient is a guy? Like, I wonder how these medical ethics shaila work out for a doctor. What if a doctor has to perform an abortion on a goyish woman who, if they don't perform the abortion, she might die? In Tosfos, you see, it's a shaila. That would be a problem or not. But it's not as good as the shaila from last night. That if a guy cooks something and then he becomes a ger, can he eat that food, or is it bishalachim? You heard the shaila? You heard? But last night they asked Rabbi Tausa, let me tell you the most unusual shaila that was ever asked of me. There was a ger who called me and says, "Listen, I'm very hungry. I'm home. I have lasagna in the fridge that I made when I was a guy. Am I allowed to eat it now because it's bishalachim?" That was the shaila that Rabbi Tausa said over. He didn't give us an answer. He says, all I can tell you is, Baruch Hashem, I'm not involved with Gerim anymore, and I hope I'll never be involved with them. It's very complicated, he said. He's talking more about her. Kol mitzvah. He also said that being a Rav, it's not fun, it's never definitive. You're always having anxiety about if you did the right thing. It's never so clear cut. It's always it's a torturous position to be in when you don't have anything clear cut and you don't know, did you do the right thing, you didn't do the right thing. So he gave us a little bit of a flashback. So Akiva says, and you think it's so easy to be a balabos? You make it sound like for us it's easy. Zok kol mitzvah shenemer livnei noyach v'nishnis besinai lozev lozenemer. So the Gemara is going to challenge that principle. Zok to Gemara, v'arei mila. What about the mitzvah of mila? Shenemer livnei noyach. Tichsiv v'atos perisi tishmar. It was told to Avram Avinu, and v'nishnis besinai. And the Torah says uvayoyim hashmini yimoil, and we say that it's the Yisrael number of v'lo livnei noyach. You see, there is no mitzvah for a goy to give a bris, but based on your principle, that general rule, there should be a chiyuv for a goy to give a bris. So the Gemara uvayoyim hashmini isn't telling us the iser, the chiyuv of mila. If it was, you would be right. The v'yoyim hashmini is just telling you a separate halacha that mila v'yoyim hashmini is doiche Shabbos. The limit to Shabbos would also not to tell us the halacha. So therefore, it's something that we don't consider having being repeated in Sinai, and therefore it does not apply to a goy. And v'nishnis b'Sinai, where it says leich emor lahem shuvu lochem alechem, and David asked yesterday, Fakert. You see, there's Midrashim who said that they were boichel mishpachosov, that they weren't allowed to go back to their families. So shuval aleichem can't possibly mean that they should be mizavik. So there must be different opinions in different Midrashim. Because here, leich amar lehem shuval lechem aleichem was referring to actually being mizavik with their mates. So you see, they were commanded to do periyav. The Gemara, Yisrael Nemra, V'loi Livnei Noach. Are you going to tell me that Puravu only applies to Yisrael and not Bnei Noach? Dr. Gemara, no, we know that Mitzvah Puravu only applies to a Yid and not a Goy, but since it was repeated, it should apply to both. So Dr. Gemara, that is not a Tzivoy Puravu. Hahu Lachem L'chol Dover Shebeminyan Tzarech Minyan Acher Latirei. You know, everyone's been talking about the Trump tax cuts are going to expire unless they're going to be renewed. When it comes to halacha, whenever a halacha, a gzeira, is placed, and it's placed with a built-in time limit, it doesn't expire. It has to be removed. That's what we learn from here. L'chol davar shebeminyan, even though it was given for a limited time period, you still need tzarech minyan acher latirei hudasa. That's what it teaches you. How do you see that from Shuva Lachem La'alechem? Zokt Rashi L'chol davar shebeminyan. I'm sorry. What type of halachas? That's exactly what Rashi is going to explain. L'chol davar shebeminyan.
Wasn't Puruvu given to both Adam and Noach?
Yeah, so it's given to Bnei Noach, and it was repeated by Sinai. So therefore, it should apply to a goy and a yid. But we know the halach is there is no mitzvah of Puruvu to a goy.
I know, but how do we know that?
Because it was not repeated. Because it was not repeated. So this general rule. It was repeated. That's why the Gemara has to say the repetition is not repeating the chiyuv of puravu. The repetition is a completely different halach.
I don't get it.
There's a general rule that we learn from Avodah Zarah that the only type of isurim that also apply to a goy are isurim that were told to b'nei Noach and were repeated by Sinai. And if it wasn't repeated by Sinai, it no longer applies to a goy. So that was the principle that was taught to us. The Gemara challenged it because the Gemara says Puravu was told to b'nei Noach. It was repeated in Sinai, and the halacha is there is no mitzvah of Puravu for a goy. So that is the kasha. So the Gemara said Shuvu Lechem Lalechem is not a tzivoy of Puravu. It's telling you something else. And what is it? Zok Rashi lo nishtis b'sinai ela mepnei she'asher lem tashmish shloisha yomim koydem matam Torah. Before Matan Torah, the Rebbe Shalom said everybody has to be separated from their wives. Ula'achar shloisha yomim, you don't say automatically the chiyuv, the prohibition goes away. Even though it was originally only placed for 3 days, the Torah says for 3 days. Nevertheless, hutrach lahater lehem. And that is the limit of Shuva Lechem Lalechem. To tell you that whenever the Torah says something that's osur, even though there's a time limit on it, it does not automatically expire. Shouldn't we say the Isser automatically goes away because it was only originally placed for 3 days? Even though Bezdin said we're only applying this Isser for a certain period, nevertheless, nevertheless, they have to convene again to formally say that this issue no longer applies. We know that because the Torah that put a 3-day prohibition on being mizavik with their wives still had to release it. That what? Okay, we could have a peek in Toysus. Who said Taka they're not mechuyev b'nei Noach? We're making an assumption that there's no chiyuv puravu to them. How do you know that? If it's because it was not listed amongst the Sheva mitzvahs b'nei Noach, we just said earlier that there are mitzvahs that are Sheva mitzvahs b'nei Noach that weren't listed, such as if it's a kumasei, right? We don't list as one of the Sheva mitzvahs b'nei Noach that a goy is not allowed to keep Shabbos. The Yeshloimer, the Shabbal Tasa, Namihu. Why? The Misha Mitzvah al Peri Verivya Mitzvah Shaloi Lahashch Zera. And the goy doesn't have That Isser, that's how we know, since a goy does not have an Isser of Ashkos Zera, that's how we know that a goy does not have the Chiyuv of Pru Uravu. Okay, Zok Gemara weiter. Zok Gemara weiter. Ihachi, if that's the case, then Kol Chada V'Chada Nami Neima Mishul Milsa Isni. Now that you every time we suggest that there's something that was mentioned twice and therefore should apply to Goyim, you come up with some excuse. No, it wasn't really said to repeat the Isser. It's for this reason, for that reason. By the Bris, it's to tell you that it's a Shabbos, and by Puravu, it's to tell you that you have to release the Isser. For every single one, every single halacha that has such a halacha, I'll find you as an excuse why it said it. So then you've thrown your whole rule out, and therefore nothing should apply to Abenoya. Zok Muhachi Amar. Ashara mihader umisnaba lamali. Why did it have to repeat the ashara? So Rashi ashara mihader umasna lamali lemeheder umichtav ashara. Why is there another lav? Memela by Uviyam Shmini Yimel. It's not mentioning a lav. Shuvul Chamalechim. It's not mentioning a lav. But many things it's a lav that it says you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do that. Elashmami no las hero of the noich uli Yisrael also. That's what it must be for. So you can't just make up an excuse for every lav. Lavim, that's for sure, means to apply it even to B'nai Noach L'Doros, but if it's tam a halacha that's saying that's not expressed for Torah's lav, there we could explain it away. Again, we're repeating, it's only Gid HaNasha that it's an example of something that was not repeated, and nevertheless, it does not apply to a goy. And according to Rabbi Yehuda, and we just learned from Rabbi Yehuda that it was never even said for a goy. So this doesn't need to follow the rule. So we don't even have a specific example that follows this rule. Because even Gid HaNasha, which seems to follow the rule, since it wasn't repeated, doesn't apply to a goy. What did Rabbi Yehuda say? Even then it was only said L'vnei Yisrael. Zok Gemara, Hani Nami Loy Isni. Hani Nami Loy Isni. These other ones, Mila, Uperi Virivya, the Amrit Lemilsa Isnu. So they weren't repeated. Why weren't they repeated? Because even the ones that were repeated, we explained it away. So Gemara, Hani Isni L'Shomilsa Ba'alma Ha Loy Isni Kla. If it was said over for a specific reason, there we don't say that it applies to a goy. But if it wasn't mentioned at all, like Gid HaNasha wasn't mentioned at all, there we say it doesn't apply to goy. So tomorrow, Iba Yisema, Mila may kar Avram Huda Mekamahazule. Maybe Mila is also like Gid HaNasha, and it was originally only given to Avram. Why? The Kamazale Rachmana, the Ata Esperisi Sishmar, Ata Vizarecha Acharecha L'Dairesam. So you see the mitzvah of Mila was only given to Avram and his progeny. Ata Vizarecha in the Shachrin Eloi. And maybe that's why it doesn't apply to B'nai Noach, because even when it was originally given to B'nai Noach, it wasn't given to the B'nai Noach, similar to Gid HaNasha. Zok Gemara, Elamayata B'nai Yishmael L'chayvai. So Ibazai, if it was given to the B'nai Avram, why isn't there a Chiyav Mila for B'nai Yishmael? B'nai Yishmael get a bris, that's their own Narishkeit. Technically, La'alacha, they're not Mukhiv in a bris. Zok Gemara, because it says, Ki Bi Yitzchak Yikar Los Chazara, not all of Yitzchak's children have Da'adin, only Yaakov and not Yishmael. Not all of Avram's children are Mechuyvet, only Yitzchak and not Yishmael. I don't think so. B'nai Esav, L'chayvai, so B'nai Esav should be Chayiv. They're also the children of Avram Avinu. So Gemara, Bi Yitzchak, like Kol Yitzchak. Only part of Yitzchak, meaning Yaakov, but it doesn't apply to Esav. Zok Gemara, Maskav Lo Rab Oishia. Frek of Oishia Kasha. Elmayato, B'nai Keturah, Lo L'chayvai, Avram Avinu gave a bris to the B'nai Keturah. They were his children, the children that he had from Hagar. Ha'amar Rabbi Yosy bar Abba, v'tem Rabbi Yosy bar Chanina, Esperisi Heifar l'Rabish B'nai Keturah. The pasuk of Esperisi Heifar is extra. Those words are extra, and that's how we know that Avram had to give the B'nai Keturah a bris as well. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rav. Adam Rishon loy huter loy basar lachil. This is a fascinating Gemara. Adam Rishon was never allowed to eat meat. Dichsiv lachem yeh la'achla ulechol chayis haaretz. The grass, the plants, is given to you, Adam, to eat as well as to the chayis haaretz. So we learn v'loy chayis haaretz lachem. You both get plants and fruits and vegetables, but you don't get the chayis haaretz. Ucheshabo b'nei Noach. Once B'nai Noach came and they saved all of the animals in the Mabul. Then hitter lahem. At that point, they were allowed to eat meat. Shenamar keyerek esev nosati lachem es kol. So you might have thought that once Noach was allowed to eat meat, there was no longer a prohibition of Ever Minachai. Talmud Leimer, directed Noach directly, that pasuk is referring to Hashem speaking to Noach. You would have thought that there's also an Isser Ever Minachai of Shrotzim. Talmud Leimer, it doesn't apply to Shrotzim. Umay Talmudah. How do you know this? Omar Funa Damai. How do you know to apply ach to shrotzim? Maybe ach is saying that there's no Ever Minachai somewhere else, right? It's just a meat. It's not defined what the meat is for. Omar Funa Damai. Misha Damai Chalak Mi Besarai Yatsa Shrotzim Shein Damam Chalak Mi Besarim. That's that same limud that we saw from Rashi on Nun Chesamim base or on Zayin base. Meishe Frek the Gemara. It says, Uridu b'degas hayam. Adam was told that you will go rule over the fish of the sea. Exactly in what way are you ruling over fish? What are you going to do with fish? My love, lachila, obviously means you're allowed to eat them. So you see that Adam was allowed to eat fish. He was allowed to eat the chayes haaretz. I'm sorry? How are you being ruling over fish? You're looking at them. Right? So to Gemara, l'malacha. You're actually using the fish to do work for you, and this is not a joke. How in the world could you harness the working power of fish? The boy Rachba in Hilchas Klein. You're not allowed to harness two different animals together, and have them pull a wagon. And Rachba the following shaila. You had a wagon that was at the side of the river, and you harnessed it to a goat, and you also harnessed it to a fish that was swimming parallel in the river. Are you allowed to do that? So obviously, there you can harness fish power. No, I didn't actually. Zok to Gemara. So the Gemara has another kasha. Uva oif hashemayim. Adam was told that he could rule over the oif hashemayim. Exactly how would he be ruling over the oif hashemayim? My lav lachila. Must be allowed to eat it. Zok to Gemara loy l'malacha. They knew exactly how could you get a bird to work for you. I don't know. I have some bird brains to work for me. The halacha is, it says right? So the halacha is the only people that you're not that you're over is if all four of their appendages are used. So a person working is using his two legs to work and his two arms to work. A behema is using all four legs to work. But what about a bird? Its arms are its wings. It's not using its wings if it's threshing. It's just stepping on the tvua. So there's a shaila of dosh ba'avazim v'tarnagolim. Rabbi Yosy bar Yehuda mai. So you see clearly that chickens can be used, birds can be used to do work with. Tashma. It says uv'chol chaya harei meses ala aretz. Who are you ruling over? So vaystachois, it must mean that you're allowed to eat it. That's to tell us that that Adam even ruled over the Nachash. Now the Nachash used to walk on its hind legs like a human. It was very human-like. Tanya Rab Shimon ben Menashe Omer. This is fascinating. Chaval. What a shame that the Nachash was choite, and because of that, its arms and legs were cut off, and now it crawls on the earth. You know why? Chaval al shamash godol she'abad min ha'olam. What a shame, because how useful the Nachash could have been to mankind, to peoplekind, had the Nachash not been punished. Shil molin iskal Nachash, kol echad ve'echad mi Yisrael, hayim izdamin and loy, shnei Nachashim. This is such an appropriate Gemara for today. Every person would have two servants, butlers, that were Nachashim. Tovim, great. Echad mishagri l'tzofon, ve'echad mishagri l'darim. You never want to live in a climate where it's too cold. So we would live in Florida, and if you need business up in Canada, you'd send one Nachash, let him deal with the cold weather and the snow. And if you needed something done further south where it's really, really hot, you don't want to go there, you'll send your other Nachash. So you had your cold Nachash and you had your warm Nachash, and you would just sit in Miami a whole day. What a life. That's how it was supposed to. The Baruch just wanted us to sit in Miami and have two Nachashim, two snakes, do our business for us. Lahavi loy sandleboinim toivim vavonim toivim margolios, that would be able to acquire these wonderful items that are only available in cold countries or warm countries. Mati, what are sandleboinim? It's not over the gem. Not only that, and I think I understand what the Gemara is saying is they would put like a little bag underneath the tail of the snake, and they would even gather manure from what the snake was going to excrete. Is that what it means? So it doesn't mean the excrete. It just means he would be like a bulldozer. He would be Gavalta. He would be your little transport truck. So that's what it means. Meisvei Zakt Gemara. So to Malach Avada, you weren't allowed to eat it. Meisvei. Hayir Rabbi Yehuda Matema Omer. This is Gavalta. Adam Rishain Meisav Gan Eden. He lived in Gan Eden. Now in Gan Eden, it was mamish like paradise. Why? V'hayu Malachei Ashares Tzoylin Loy Basar. He would be sitting on this beach chair, relaxing, and Malachim would be barbecuing for him the most delicious cuts of spare ribs of different meats. So you see, he ate meat. Umisanin loy yain, and they would be straining wine for him. Imagine you're lying down there, and the malachim are serving you a tequila with like a shmaka barbecued rib steak. It was mamish heaven over there. Now I know why it was called Ganed. And what happened was hitzis boy nachash rabachvoy. The nachash saw, wow, the life of man is unbelievable. Viniskane. And they got jealous, the Niskana boy, and that's what messed it all up. Since he was jealous, he attacked Chava and so on and so forth. So you see over here, in fact, that Adam ate meat. How could you tell me the Adam wasn't allowed to eat meat? So tomorrow, this is cholesterol-free meat. It was cholesterol-free. Could you imagine? That's mamash Ganeden. Can you really have meat that just comes down from heaven that doesn't have cholesterol? In Zok Gemara. He was walking down the street. He bumped into some lions that were hungry and they wanted to eat him. They were growling as if they're going to eat him up. He was terrified. Omar, he said, the little lions are screaming they want their food. What happened? 2 big pieces of meat came down from Shemayim. One were given to the lions, the Chadash Avku, and one he kept for himself. I say he brought a piece of meat and he wanted to know if he was allowed to eat it. He didn't know what the hechsher was. It came from Hashem. He doesn't know if he can trust Hashem's hechsher. For also levei midrasha boyala davar tamay huza I davar tar. Am I allowed to eat this meat? Amrlei the Haksten Kappadain. Ein davar tamay yared min hashemayim. Anything that comes from Shemayim has got to be kosher. If it's from God Himself, you're not even going to trust Him. Right? They say that's why there's the Yosy and the Sharabar. So it'll be for frumkat to people who, even by the Sudas Mashiach, will say, I'll take the fish. Right? Because you don't even trust the Rebbeinu Shalom. What about Yordaloi Demus Chamor Mahu? What if the piece of meat looked like a chamor? So that's Mamish Oser. Amrlei Yared Nala. Idiot what you are. What does Rashi say what Yared Nala is? Tanin Shoita. You're a stupid snake that you're asking such a shayla. It doesn't matter what shape it's in. If it comes from Shemayim, it's mutter to eat. Okay, we will stop here. It's like a fascinating Gemara. Can you imagine he was able to sit back and relax, snaps his finger, and the malach brings him a tequila, and a geshmaka barbecued rib steak, marbleized, geshmak sizzling, without cholesterol. I'm sorry? He did get meat. He had this type of meat. It was like artificial meat in the Shemayim. He did get meat. Now it's Geshmak. Now we wish we can all be in a name. Okay, Gavaltik. These are fascinating Gemaras.